Bar. I'm the director of events and marketing here at Power2Fly, coming to you from almost fall like New York, summery fall New York. And we're super excited for this conversation on AI. Very quickly, I just want to bring your attention to our code of conduct, which I'm going to pop in the chat just shortly, just to make sure we follow that so we have a great conversation. If you are joining us live, we'd also love to hear from you in the chat. Let us know where you are. I see Bay Area and Spain, of course. So that is fantastic. If you have any questions for Mara, pop those also into the chat. If we don't get to them all right now, we'll do our best to follow up with them in the future also. But without further ado, I'd love to turn things over to my amazing colleague, Mara Gates. She is the Director of Content Marketing here at Power2Fly. She works at an intersection of strategy, people, and leadership with a recent focus on what it looks like to integrate AI into work efficiently and empathetically. She approaches problems with curiosity and an interest in the people behind them. Mara, welcome to the Power2Fly stage. Before I turn things over to you, anything else that you want the folks to know about you today?
No, I don't think so. That was such a beautiful introduction. I feel royal. I appreciate that. We can go ahead and just dive right in. So this is going to be a pretty quick fire session. And so let me go ahead and share my screen, make sure. Okay. Um, we're going to get started. This is going to be about 30 minutes. So, and also it's very, very hands-on. So if you're in the crowd or and watching or even watching the recording, please participate as much participation as possible because the more you put into it, the more you get out of it. I promise. Okay, so the first uh, prompt or question I would like for you all to drop in the chat. And so this is a question. When something you built or use with AI doesn't work the way you expected, what is the first thing that you tend to check? And that can be, the prompt, the data set, whatever. What's the first thing that comes to mind when you do that? Yeah, the prompt. I probably would say the prompt input values. Great. Um, and I mean that pretty much tracks with everybody that I've talked to. And just for a little bit of context, for the past year, we've been putting in quite a bit of effort into just understanding what's going on in AI in companies. And so we've been talking to clients, leaders, AI folks who are, really, really close to this work and trying to understand what's working, what's not working. And so when I say I've been in dozens and dozens and dozens of conversations, this is, very typical. When AI is not working, the first thing to blame, obviously, is the prompt, the model itself. Oops. So just to preface this, like I said, we spent all that time doing deep researching and stuff, and something unexpected actually came up is AI, especially internal models in projects, it's not going as well as we thought it would. And most of the folks that we've spoken to have said, they initially blamed the technology, but the data does not actually point to the model. And here are just a few stats that support that. So 80% plus of AI projects fail to deliver the value they were supposed to. 95% of generative AI pilots never make it past the proof of concept, and 84% of AI program failures trace back to people and not leadership. So when I said that, like checking the model, the prompt, and all those things first is a reasonable instinct, I meant that because most people do that. But that's actually not where the true problem lies. And here's the way that I like to put it. If it's a model problem, more engineering fixes it. And if it's a people problem, no amount of engineering will fix it. So actually diagnosing which type of problem you're actually dealing with, that's what we're going to be doing with the rest of this session. So get ready. The next one is a poll, and Rob, if you can pull that up. I just want to know who is in the room today. So which person or which best describes you right now? Are you a leader or an influencer in an AI initiative at your company? Do you use AI tools regularly, but you're not actually the one heading the strategy? Where are you here? Cool. Well, looks like there's a nice mix of people in here. Some leaders, some folks who are using it for their own strategy, and some people who are just curious, which I totally respect because same. So we'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. And this is really kind of where this all begins. So I want to tell you a quick story because somebody actually sent in one of this as a question ahead of time. And the question was, what's an AI effort that looked good on paper but failed in practice? And what did that reveal? So this is for you, whoever sent that in. So I'll tell you a story. And it just comes from one of the many conversations that we've held with companies who are trying to implement AI, but to make things more efficient and easy, but sometimes it backfires. And so there's a mid-size healthcare company, can't use names. Oh, here, let me just make sure I share the results of the poll. There's a mid-size healthcare company that built a tool to summarize patient intake forms. This is something that normally takes a lot of time. Um, for healthcare practitioners. And so this is supposed to, save them a little bit of time. It worked beautifully in testing. It was super impressive. But a few weeks after it had gone live, it started missing some very context-specific risk factors. And it was something that, a nurse or a CNA would be able to catch without thinking twice. But the model just wasn't doing what it was supposed to do. And the important thing is that the model wasn't actually broken. The model was doing exactly what it was trained to do. However, the data and the team that trained and evaluated it had never actually worked on a clinical floor. So they didn't know what they didn't know, and it actually took a nurse who was on staff who flagged it like 3 weeks later before anybody, anything was done about it. So um, if you're keeping track, the story here really talks about two of these ways that AI failure shows up. So the first one is accountability without experience. Happens when nobody actually owns a judgment call between what the model spit out and what happens next. And that happens here in the healthcare story. There's nobody who was like the accountability person, like, hey, there's a problem here. That whole entire step was skipped. And then the second one is training data in a narrow room. It looked comprehensive in testing, I'm sure, but it just never saw what the room that built it could see. So that's also the healthcare story. There was no true clinician in there who could really say, hey, this is a little bit off, or this might not work, or in context specific moments, this might not be the correct output. Two other ways is the wrong search. So this happens a lot. This has happened a lot with the clients that we've been talking to, is the wrong search. So when uh, a job post is asking for an AI engineer, but they actually need a domain expert who's picked up AI along the way. It's a completely different skill set. It's a different person. And so a lot of times we're like so obsessed with AI, and we don't need an engineer. We need a marketer who's remarkable at using Claude for content creation, or we need a customer success manager who knows how to use AI in different contexts. So these are all really, oh, and then the last one, sorry, is scale without accountability. You can produce a ton of training data quickly, but when you try asking who actually produced it and under what conditions, a lot of teams can't answer that. So these are four symptoms with the same root cause, and that's what stalled in the healthcare story. And if you take a hard look at yourself and your team, it might be worth checking there too if you have any gaps that like, hey, is there anybody who's responsible for the AI that your team is putting out? How's the training data and who is training your stuff? Can you say that? Can you confidently identify the people who have trained your models? Those are the kind of things that we need to start looking at. So that takes me to the next poll. is which of these hits closest to home? So take a moment to reflect. Think about this one for a second before you answer. So which of these is closest to home? Accountability without expertise, training data from a narrow room, the wrong search, scale without accountability, or option E, all four. Like I said, no shame in that. Or none. Okie Well, y'all keep putting in your answers. Um, For me, the first two are the ones that tend to track the most. So people, accountability without expertise and training data from a narrow room are the two that tend to be kind of the biggest. And that's kind of what we're seeing here as well in the poll. There's not responsible people. But anyways, this looks like a good mix of stuff. So that's great. Let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. And I think naturally, now that we've gone through this, the next question is, okay, now that we have a diagnosis, where do I actually start? And then picking from some of the questions that you all sent in before or when you registered, two folks actually sent in questions that were very similar. One was, where should leaders start when an org doesn't even have a shared definition of AI ready yet? Which, same, it's very difficult to have that definition. And the other one was, how are leaders measuring whether a rollout is actually working beyond just usage numbers? And so this framework, its 4 steps, is really going to answer both of those questions. And it's something that we talk about a lot. It's based around an NIST's AI risk management framework, but we simplified it a lot and added our own twist to it so that it's short enough that you can actually use it and not like be like, oh, here's a framework and it's cute, but you don't actually use it because that happens a lot. So step one is to match decision points. Find every place in the workflow where AI systems output actually affects a person, a client, or a compliance outcome. Here's the thing about that first submitted question about not having a shared definition of AI ready. You don't actually need an agreement on a specific definition. What you need an agreement on is where the AI touches a real decision. So that's a much more it's a more doable conversation to have with your team than to try to define AI ready, which is like very abstract. So a quick example, going back to the healthcare story that I shared before, the decision point in that context was the exact moment the tool's summary reached a clinician's eyes. So you would map that, and then step two becomes easy to identify, and that is to name a specific role. So this should be an actual title on an org chart, like not, oh, the ops team will handle it type thing. Like it needs to be an actual person with a name. And I know it sounds like silly, but it's not as obvious as you may think. A lot of people think that somebody else is responsible for AI and they're not. So this is something to keep in mind. Next is to set escalation criteria. And this means to decide ahead of time what counts as a low confidence output and exactly what the reviewer does next. So this is the answer to the second question, measuring beyond usage numbers. Usage tells you about adoption, but it doesn't tell you who trusts, it doesn't tell you about trusts. So escalation criteria will actually tell you whether people trust the output enough to act on it without a safety net. And then there's another nuance that I want to mention here is that the person who reviews the reviewer, the person who reviews your AI, needs to have real authority to act on what they find. So this is not a person who says, hey, I found something like the nurse, hey, I found something that's wrong with this. But the nurse has no authority to actually fix what's going on inside of the actual technology. So this person needs to be an expert in the field, but they also need to know how to work with AI. So it needs to be a person who's actually in the loop. So it's a human in the loop that's actually in the loop who has authority to make changes. Because if not, it's going to end up being this huge, drawn out approval chain that doesn't end up getting fixed, which is part of the problem. And lastly is documentation. So if a regulator, a client, or a board member ever asks who reviewed a decision, you have to have an answer. That's point blank period. The answer needs to be immediate and not something that you have to go and dig for. But like I said, there needs to be one person at least in your organization, or if it's yourself, who you can confidently pull up and say, hey, this is a person who is responsible for our AI outputs. And that's the other half of measuring beyond usage numbers. Because if you have a documented review trail, it's a real, actually defensive measure of whether a rollout actually is working or not. And a usage dashboard isn't going to do that. And another thing I want to mention here is AI regulation. So both in the US and the EU and also in other parts of the world now, there have been new regulations that are coming out. Every single week, there's a new AI regulation. And so it's really, really important to be on top of that. And one of the biggest ones that is affecting the EU and pretty soon the US is this defensibility one. So you have to make sure that everything is documented. You need to have a regulator. You need to have all of that information about who is training your data, where the data set comes from. All that information needs to be documented. So I cannot stress about how important it is to document everything. So with all that in mind, I want you to take a second and actually think about your own team. Um, so, if an AI output was confidently wrong, who would be the person to catch it on your team? You can drop a role or a name title in the chat. That's fine. If somebody is actually formally assigned to that, it could be you, it could be nobody. I can confidently say that it's most likely nobody for many people. So if once again, I'll ask if an AI output was confidently wrong, oops, who would be the person to catch it on your team? And I'll just give us a few seconds to think about it. Okay, we have it QA'd by a colleague, probably me. Yeah, same for me. It's probably me too. That's real. Um, CTO marketing, there's not an actual job title there. Code reviewer, probably me. Cool. So I'm seeing some good ones. And if your answer is secretly like nobody, that's also useful information. And it's not a failure, honestly. And that's kind of exactly what we're talking about here is like, this is not a shame game. This is just real life. Like AI is new and we're all figuring this out together. So let's talk about what a fix would actually look like. And it sounds so simple, but it's not. So really, it's just one person that's positioned close enough to this decision to catch when a model goes confidently wrong, somebody with authority who can actually do something about it. That's it. Like we can end the call here. Obviously, that role shifts depending on your industry. It's going to look different in healthcare versus legal versus financial services, products, support, data. But the underlying principle doesn't change. So, like I said, the nurse from the story earlier with the intake form, the idea is the same. So, a clinician that would actually review the AI generated diagnostic suggestion before it actually reaches a patient's chart, that would be perfect because they would be able to catch easily a plausible, so a confidently wrong, plausible but wrong call that somebody who's purely a technical reviewer would miss. Um, so before I kind of close this out, I know this was like very simple, but it's one of those things where it's like it's obvious but not easy. Um, Only 6% of employed professionals right now are focused on advancing at their current company and most are actively looking elsewhere. And this is something that we found in a study that we did with our community at Power to Fly. 6% of professionals are trying to stay at their company. And what does that tell us? That tells us that people are willing to move, they're wanting to move, they're wanting to try new things. And so the people that this is like the group of people that we've been talking about this whole session. They're the ones who can fill the role that, not the AI engineering role, but the customer success manager who is AI empowered or the AI enabled product marketer. Those are the people who are going to be catching the small nuances that maybe your model may not find. And I always go to a similar, to the same example because I actually studied medicine and I ended up doing marketing, kind of weird, but whatever. Is I remember when I was in school and we were looking at rashes, medical school, we were looking at rashes, and you know, I was about to misdiagnose a rash on somebody who had brown skin because in the textbooks, the rashes all looked like they had like red, redness with spots, while on brown skin it looked more, like white. And so I thought this can't be, the same thing. But that's because the data that I received, which was the textbook data that was not written for people of color or about people of color, totally missed this giant group of people that exist in the world. And so I always go back to that same example because it's very similar to how AI works. And so we need people, we need brown doctors, we need people from all different backgrounds, all different walks of life, all different experiences, languages spoken, all of the things to be able to, um, train first of all, and then, catch different issues that an AI output might bring. So, uh, someone also sent in a question, which I liked as like a closing question. It said, a year from now, what would it actually look like if an org has closed its AI gap? Um, and I would put it that a year from now, a strong AI program looks like every decision point has a named person behind it. That person has real authority to step in, and there's a record you could hand to anyone who asks. And this is like not optional anymore. Like I'm saying, like I think it's the decision was to start in August, but actually it's been pushed back to December. But if your team is working with any sort of AI, you need to have those types of people and records in place because you can be audited and you have to be, make sure that you have your what is it, your I's dotted and your T's crossed, something like that. So, anyways, that's really it. And there are two quick next steps, depending on who you are and where you are. We have some people from sort of every walk in life here, which I love. So, if you're leading an AI initiative, pick one decision point this week and run through it, run through the full audit, and then that we walked through. And in the post event email, I'll be sure to share the actual full audit with you. It's published on our website, so it'll be easy for you to go through. And then if you're an individual contributor, that same framework works just as well for any AI tool you personally use or recommend. So I recommend that you go ahead and give it a try. And I think you would be pleasantly surprised that your AI gap has now been diagnosed and you can move forward with some of the solutions that I suggested. And we have a few minutes to go to questions.
Well, thank you, Mar. That was great. And as you said, we're going to send out this recording. So if there was anything you missed, this will be arriving in your inbox with that audit that you can also take. But yeah, we had one question that came in during the event, which I think is a good one from Angie, was asking, would you say there is more pronounced, would you say, I guess, AI adoptability or hurdles are more pronounced in different areas, such as defense? They work in government and they found hurdles for Gen AI. I do
Yeah.
know, like, for example, I know legal and finance, typically there are more hurdles to get through at least.
Yeah, I do think that like the error rate is pretty similar across industries, but what I think is occurring here is that government has a much higher risk associated with it, and
Mhm.
same with finance, same with healthcare, same with some of the industries that I was mentioning before. So we see it a lot in legal and financial services and healthcare. That's kind of like the main three, but also government. Anything that's like really high risk. So where somebody's life, and the example of the healthcare one, might be put into, danger or somebody's well-being. That's, something that we've got to, be careful about.
I love that. Yeah, I think you're spot on there. And another question we had sent in earlier was how are leaders measuring whether an AI rollout is actually working beyond usage numbers? This actually reminds me of the same question we often got
Yeah.
on inclusion points, where it's like you can put all these things into place, but how are you actually measuring whether you're creating a more inclusive workplace? How can leaders actually measure if AI is rolling out successfully?
Yeah, and that's I kind of mentioned it before is it's obviously you can't just look at the usage dashboard. You need to know, who is actually trusting your AI, and that's when you have somebody who's accountable for, any errors, if they're receiving a lot of flags, or if they're receiving a lot of hey, this might not be correct. If they're receiving feedback that people are trusting AI and what the output is, then that's a good sign. If they're receiving a lot of flag, then that's probably a bad sign. And so leaders, it's not a simple, black and white. It's not a qualitative question or quantitative question. It's a qualitative question. So
Mhm.
it's more about chatting with your team. Something that we used to do a lot at Power to Fly is just kind of do pulse check surveys. So we would send surveys to everybody on the team to kind of understand what's working, what's not working, on a personal level and on, a technology level. So I think that's something that could help in that circumstance.
Totally. Yeah. And it does seem that AI, of course, is everywhere and everyone's using it, but
Yeah,
that's not exactly the case. There are still a lot of people, either on the individual level or on the manager level, that are skeptical of AI. Maybe people who have done the same job for a while and they're very skeptical of starting with these tools, individual contributors who might be worried that AI will kind of replace them. But what's the most effective way to kind of bring a skeptical manager or an employee along on an AI rollout without losing that natural trust that you want?
yeah. It's hard. I think it's really hard because like same, right? Like I have, and Rob knows this, I like experience AI fatigue from just
Hmm.
like too much AI input. But there that trust factor needs to be there. And so having that one specific person who's responsible for AI adoption or whatever, that's going to be where you're going to build your trust factor. Because obviously if people are skeptical about an AI rollout, they're probably not wrong to be skeptical about it because, like, scary little robots are going to take over our jobs. Like, that's scary. And so you need to have somebody who's going to actually respond to those people, not hi, we don't have anybody who's actually responsible for this. Like, all of us have just, said in the chat. So once you have a real reviewer, the AI decided we're going to do this, actually turns into a real person, and you can talk to them and they can make a call that helps, build a lot of trust. And it's not, like a communications campaign or marketing campaign, but it's actually talking to a human, which I think is really important. And I think that we also lose a lot of that with AI.
And I would
Humans
also say, like,
matter.
it also often it feels like if you're not at a certain place, you're already behind the ball. But
Totally.
that's not true. If it's going to be adding AI fatigue, if it's going to be adding AI stress, you can integrate it slowly. And
Slowly,
in fact, we
yeah,
should be integrating it slowly because so many people kind of jumped into the deep end of the pool at some point
totally.
and are not doing so many of the regulatory checks that you were
Yeah.
referring to.
And I honestly think it's just a matter of doing it, giving it a try before you discount it. I think about my mom. My mom, who,
Uh-huh.
sorry, mom, if you're watching this, she gets so angry at the self-checkout in the grocery store. She's like, these are taking people's jobs. And then the other day I saw her writing on ChatGPT and I'm like, interesting, right? Like, what are we talking about here? So it's kind of just a matter of like accepting, hey, this is part of the new normal and we can just take it on as you can, and don't make yourself fatigued by
Hmm.
it because that is
And
also
that AI is not a monolith, right? Like
it's not.
some people were referring before to generative AI, but there's also all these other kind of co-pilots and things like that. We tend to think of
Absolutely.
it being one big thing, but in fact,
Yeah,
AI has many multitudes to it.
totally. Totally. Yeah, it is wild. And yeah, like I just think about in the medical field, like there are AI like diagnosing cancer beyond what a human eye can see. Like it's doing really, really great things in the world and predicting earthquakes and trying to there it's doing great things. But I also think that there's like a bit of a negative, or there can be a bit of a negative narrative when it comes to AI. But
And it's also helping
nothing's
your
good or bad.
aunt make a very ugly poster for the family reunion potluck dinner, diagnosing big
Exactly.
medical problems and ugly posters and everything in between.
Exactly. It's about the user.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
Yeah, so I hope I empowered at least some of you all to use AI, harness it well, and in your company, harness it responsibly so that, we're not experiencing any of these major issues that a lot, and I say a lot, I mean literally a grand majority of the folks that we're talking to are experiencing, which is like, a people problem. So thank you.
Oh, yes, you totally did. Thank you so much, Mara. This was wonderful. Once again, if you are joining us live, you're going to get this recording in your inbox with the video so you could rewatch it, or perhaps you're already watching the video either from our email or from a future event. So hopefully this was very helpful to you, and we thank you for joining us. Also want to give you a shout out, audience, for spending 30 minutes with us because you helped advance your career, take the next step, whether in your AI journey or your career journey. So definitely give yourself props for that. Exactly. So we'll be back soon with more events here at Power to Fly. And until then, you can always check out all of our massive catalog over